Imagine being locked away for 7 years for a crime you didn't commit, forgotten by society, abandoned by your family, with no hope in sight. Then, one day, without warning, the president of your country walks into your cell, and everything changes. This is exactly what happened to Raphael, a simple clerk imprisoned in Burkina Faso's notorious Ouagadougou prison. When President Ibrahim Traoré showed up unannounced in a plain brown shirt, the guards didn't even recognize him at first. What he discovered inside those walls would shake an entire nation to its core. When President Ibrahim Traoré showed up at Ouagadougou Central Correctional Facility that Monday morning, nobody prepared for him. The guards at the entrance didn't even recognize him at first. He wasn't in his official uniform or presidential attire, just a simple brown shirt and trousers like any ordinary citizen might wear. No security team surrounded him, no cameras followed his movements, no press secretary made announcements. The president of Burkina Faso simply walked up to the prison gate alone and asked to be let in. The guards at the front station looked at each other in confusion. One of them asked the man to repeat himself. When Traoré stated his name and position, again, panic spread across their faces. One guard rushed to call Warden Pascal, while the others stumbled through hasty salutes and apologies. President Traoré stood patiently, watching the commotion with a neutral expression. Within minutes, Warden Pascal appeared, out of breath and adjusting his uniform. He began apologizing profusely for the lack of preparation, offering to arrange a proper tour with refreshments and suggesting they clear certain areas for the president's inspection. Traoré cut him off with a raised hand. "I want to see your facility exactly as it operates on a normal day," he said, firmly. "No preparations, no special arrangements. Show me the prison as it truly is." The warden's face fell slightly, but he nodded and led the way inside. As they walked through the main processing area, prison officials scrambled around, them whispering urgently to each other. Some tried discreetly directing them toward the newer sections of the prison that had better conditions. Traoré ignored these subtle suggestions and instead pointed to a cramped corridor leading to the general population cells. "Let's start there," he said, already walking in that direction. The cell blocks were overcrowded, with 3 or sometimes 4 inmates, sharing spaces designed for 2. The air hung heavy with the smell of unwashed bodies and poor ventilation. As Traoré moved through the narrow walkways between cells, inmates pressed against their bars, staring in disbelief at the president of their country standing just feet away. Traoré stopped at random cells, asking inmates direct questions about their living conditions, the food they received, access to medical care, and most importantly, about their cases and how long they'd been imprisoned. Prison officials followed nervously, occasionally trying to hurry the president along or interrupt inmates' responses. Traoré silenced them each time, insisting on hearing the prisoners' complete answers. Many inmates hadn't seen their families in years. Some had been waiting for trial dates that never came. Others described being arrested for minor infractions but receiving sentences normally reserved for violent crimes. Throughout these conversations, President Traoré listened intently, occasionally making notes on a small pad he carried. The warden grew visibly more uncomfortable as Traoré insisted on seeing areas beyond the standard tour route when the president requested to see the isolation cells. Pascal attempted to explain they were currently being renovated and unsuitable for visitors. Traoré simply stared at him until the Warden reluctantly led the way down a dark corridor to the most remote section of the prison. The isolation cells were tiny concrete boxes with only small slits near the ceiling for ventilation. Most contained nothing but a thin mat on the floor and a bucket in the corner. As they passed each door, Traore peered through the small observation windows. About halfway down the corridor, he stopped at one cell and looked inside for a long moment. The man inside sat motionless on his mat, not even looking up when the observation slot opened. Unlike other prisoners who had rushed to the doors when they heard visitors, this man seemed resigned to his isolation. "Open this door," Traore ordered. When the cell door swung open, the president stepped inside alone, crouching down to be at eye level with the seated prisoner. The man finally looked up, confused by the unexpected visitor. "What's your name?" Traore asked. "Raphael," the man replied, his voice scratchy from disuse. "Why are you here, Raphael?" Over the next 15 minutes, Raphael's story unfolded. 7 years earlier, he had worked as a clerk at a local import business. His boss's nephew needed a job, so Raphael was accused of stealing merchandise. Despite numbered evidence and his continued claims of innocence, he was quickly convicted and sentenced to 10 years. His court-appointed lawyer had met him only once. Before the trial, his family, unable to help and believing the accusations, eventually stopped visiting. As Raphael spoke, President Traore's expression changed from curiosity to concern and finally to anger. When the story finished, Traore stood silent for a moment before asking one final question. "Do you have any documentation of your case? Anything that might prove your innocence?" Raphael shook his head. "The only papers I saw were the ones I was forced to sign. I can't even read well, sir. I never knew exactly what they said." Traore nodded once, then turned abruptly and walked out of the cell. The warden, waiting anxiously in the corridor, stepped forward with a practiced smile. "Shall we continue the tour, Mr. President?" "No," Traore replied firmly. "What I need now are this man's complete files. Immediately." Warden Pascal shifted uncomfortably as President Traore demanded to see Raphael's case file. "Sir, these documents are kept at the Ministry of Justice. We only have basic intake information here at the facility. Retrieving the complete file could take days," he explained, hoping the president would accept this bureaucratic reality and move on. Traore wasn't satisfied with this answer. He looked directly at the warden and said, "Call your staff. Get whatever documentation you have on this prisoner. Right now. I'm not leaving until I see something concrete about this case." The president's tone left no room for negotiation. The warden nodded and sent 2 guards running to the administrative section. The documents they brought back were sparse, just intake forms and a copy of the sentencing report. Traore scanned them quickly, his expression darkening as he read. Without another word, he pulled out his phone and made a series of short, direct calls. First to his chief of staff, canceling all appointments for the day. Then to the Ministry of Justice, instructing justice. Minister Duff to meet him immediately with Raphael's complete file. Finally, to the Chief Justice, requesting his presence as well. 30 minutes later, Traore's modest car pulled up outside the towering Ministry of Justice building. No official motorcade, no security detail clearing. His path, just the president himself, focused entirely on uncovering the truth about a man everyone else had forgotten. Inside, Justice Minister Duff and the Chief Justice waited nervously in the minister's office, a thick folder between them on the conference table. As Traore walked through Raphael's case file page by page, the story became clear. His trial had lasted less than 3 hours. The only evidence presented was a statement allegedly signed by Raphael confessing to stealing valuable merchandise worth thousands of dollars. The court-appointed defense attorney had called no witnesses and barely spoke. During the proceedings, the judge, a man named Karim Diallo, had handed down the maximum sentence despite Raphael having no prior criminal record. "This makes no sense," Traore said, looking up from the documents. A first-time offender, given the maximum sentence for a non-violent crime with only a signed confession as evidence. Who was the accuser? Minister Duff consulted another paper. A businessman named Laurent Gira. He owned the import company where Raphael worked. The Chief Justice shifted in his seat. "Sir, if I may, Judge Diallo is no longer on the bench. He was quietly removed 3 years ago after some irregularities in his cases were discovered." "What kind of irregularities?" Traore asked. There were suspicions he accepted payments for favorable rulings. The Chief Justice admitted reluctantly. Traore's investigation moved quickly after that revelation. He assembled an independent team of legal experts, specifically choosing people with no connections to the current power structure. He instructed them to investigate every aspect of Raphael's case without political interference. Within a week, they uncovered the truth. Judge Diallo had been paid off by Laurent Gira, the wealthy businessman who owned the import company. Gira wanted to create a position for his nephew, but couldn't legally fire Raphael, who had a spotless work record. The solution was to frame Raphael for theft, have him imprisoned, and then hire the nephew as his replacement. Gira's wealth bought him influence with the judge, and Raphael never stood a chance. The investigators found a pattern when they dug deeper. Judge Diallo had handled dozens of cases where wealthy individuals received suspiciously favorable outcomes, while poor defendants received unusually harsh sentences. Raphael was just one victim among many in a system where justice was literally for sale. The independent team expanded their investigation to other judges and courts across Burkina Faso. They discovered 27 more cases nearly identical to Raphael's, people imprisoned for years with minimal evidence, forced confessions, and inadequate legal representation. Almost every case involved a poor citizen who had somehow inconvenienced someone with wealth or political connections. One investigator summarized their findings to President Traore. "The pattern is clear, sir. If you have money in Burkina Faso, you can buy your way out of almost any legal trouble. If you're poor, you can be thrown in prison on the flimsiest evidence, and no one will ever question it." The corruption extended beyond the courts. Prison administrators regularly lost paperwork for inmates who couldn't pay bribes. Case reviews that might have freed wrongfully convicted people were perpetually delayed. Appeals disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. The entire system was designed to serve those with resources while ignoring those without. President Traore called an emergency meeting with his cabinet after reviewing all the evidence. "This isn't just about Raphael," he told them. "This is about a fundamental breakdown of justice in our country. How many more innocent people are sitting in our prisons right now because they were poor or because they angered someone with influence? This ends now." The investigation exposed something many Burkinabe people had suspected, but few had been able to prove: that the justice system functioned as a tool for the rich and powerful rather than as a protector of rights for all citizens. What started as one president's surprise visit to a prison had uncovered a scandal that would shake the foundations of Burkina Faso's entire legal System. The morning after his investigation concluded, President Traore returned to Ouagadougou prison. This time he wasn't alone. A small group of reporters and a cameraman followed him through the main gates, their equipment capturing every moment. Prison officials scrambled to accommodate the unexpected. Media presence as Traore walked with purpose through the facility. He didn't stop to speak with the warden or guards. He didn't pause for administrative formalities. He moved directly toward the isolation wing where Raphael sat, in the same small cell where they'd first met. Raphael looked up when his cell door opened, confusion clear on his face. The small space suddenly filled with light from camera equipment. President Traore stepped inside. Raphael blinked at the brightness, unsure. What was happening? When Traore extended his hand, Raphael hesitated, before slowly taking it. Raphael, my investigation has confirmed what you told me, Traore announced, cameras recording his every word. You are being released today. You have spent 7 years in prison for a crime you did not commit. Raphael stared at the president, then at the cameras, then back at Traore. He thought he was dreaming. He had imagined freedom so many times during those 7 years that this moment felt unreal. When Traore helped him stand and guided him toward the door, Raphael's legs trembled. He hadn't walked more than a few steps in any direction for months. The cameras captured everything as Raphael took his first steps out of the prison. He squinted in the bright sunlight, his thin frame dwarfed by the president walking beside him. The images appeared on front pages across Burkina Faso the next morning. Citizens who had grown accustomed to political corruption and institutional failures watched in shock as their president personally escorted a wrongfully imprisoned man to freedom. Raphael's first night of freedom was spent in the presidential guest house. After 7 years of sleeping on a thin mat in a concrete cell, he found himself in a comfortable bed with clean sheets. He received new clothes to replace his prison uniform. A doctor examined him and prescribed treatment for malnutrition and other health issues that had developed during his imprisonment. For the first time in years, Raphael ate proper meals and bathed in warm water. 3 days later, once Raphael had regained some strength, President Traore invited him to the presidential palace. Their meeting wasn't a brief photo opportunity or a symbolic gesture. Traore cleared his schedule for the afternoon and listened as Raphael described his life before his arrest, his work as a clerk, his hopes for the future, his family who had abandoned him when he was labeled a criminal. Raphael spoke for hours about the nightmare that followed his false accusation, the rushed trial, the forced confession, the years of neglect in prison. Traore took notes throughout, asking questions and seeking to understand the full extent of the injustice. The next day, President Traore held a press conference with Raphael. Standing beside him, government officials and media representatives filled the room as Traore addressed the nation. "Meet Emmanuel," Traore declared. "He is not a criminal. He is a survivor." The president formally apologized on behalf of the government for the injustice Raphael had suffered, acknowledging the system's failure. Then Traore announced something unexpected. Raphael would lead a new Justice Review Task Force with authority to identify others who had been wrongfully imprisoned. The room buzzed with surprise. A former prisoner given authority within the justice system was unprecedented. Raphael took to his new role with determination born from his own suffering. He traveled to prisons across Burkina Faso, sitting face to face with inmates and listening to their stories. His background gave him unique insight. He recognized patterns in cases similar to his own: rushed trials, forced confessions, inadequate legal representation. He knew which questions to ask, and which details revealed potential injustice. The task force's work produced results quickly. They identified dozens of cases requiring immediate review. Isidore, a farmer who had spent 12 years in prison, was released when the task force discovered no evidence had ever connected him to the crime he supposedly committed. Jacob, wrongfully accused by a business rival, regained his freedom after losing 9 years to false accusations. Each case reinforced what Raphael already knew: the justice system had been failing the country's most vulnerable citizens for years. Raphael's transformation from forgotten prisoner to justice advocate inspired people across Burkina Faso. Citizens who had suffered similar injustices came forward with their stories. Legal reform advocates who had been fighting for change for years found their efforts suddenly supported by the president himself. Raphael became a symbol of hope in a country where many had given up on the possibility of true justice. For Raphael, the work provided something he never expected to find again. After his wrongful imprisonment, purpose, the pain of his 7 lost years, remained, but he channeled that pain into ensuring others wouldn't suffer the same fate. Each person freed through the task force's efforts represented a small piece of redemption, not just for the justice system, but for Raphael himself. What began as a simple prison visit turned into a national movement for justice reform. President Traore's willingness to listen to Raphael changed everything. Within a year, Burkina Faso rewrote its legal codes, established independent review boards, and freed over 200 wrongfully imprisoned citizens. Neighboring African nations sent representatives to study these reforms. Ghana, Mali, and Niger implemented similar systems after witnessing Burkina Faso's success. Raphael's transformation proved even more remarkable. From isolated prisoner to trusted advisor on human rights issues, his journey showed how leadership that confronts injustice directly can transform society rapidly. His story continues to inspire citizens across Africa to believe in the possibility of true justice.